Welcome to Pivot Points, a new series featuring some of the world's most successful women, candidly sharing their stories and insights about how they made it to the top and how you can too. Hosted by Perry Yeatman, a straight-talking global executive and award-winning author who created the career and life of her dreams and now wants to help other ambitious women do the same.
Welcome. This is Perry Yeatman, host of Pivot Points. My next guest is just such a wonderful woman. I had the privilege and the pleasure of getting to know her this past year. She is one of those rare females who made it to the top in the world of finance, having spent more than 25 years at Legg Mason, rising through the ranks to SVP and portfolio manager, where she was responsible for more than 20 billion, and that's with a B, 20 billion in client assets. Today, she is on the board of directors for MGM Resorts International, serving on both the audit and the compensation committees. When I think of her, three descriptors immediately spring to mind: committed, caring, and consummate professional. Her name is Mary Chris Gay, and I'm just delighted she could be here with us today, but even more, I'm delighted to call her my friend. Welcome, Mary Chris.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for your kind words. I'm excited to be here and share whatever I can with your audience.
Oh, I just know your story has so much for everyone. So we know where you are. We know that you rose to the top at Legg Mason and have had an amazingly rich career in finance. But could you tell us a little bit about where it all began? What was that first job that really kind of launched you, and how did you get it?
Well, as you mentioned, I spent 25 years in asset management, and my undergrad and graduate degrees are in finance. As part of my course requirements, I had to do an internship, and I was fortunate to get an internship at Legg Mason, and that opened my eyes to the difference between a paid internship and an unpaid internship. And for a paid internship, you're basically trading your time for their money, and they can task you with whatever it is that is top of priority. But the unpaid internship, it allowed me to really understand the business, and perhaps it was out of guilt for the people that I was working for because I wasn't being paid. I was able to meet a lot more people and understand the business quite a bit more, and it really opened up my eyes to certainly the benefits of an unpaid internship, but also how important it is to develop relationships with people that you can learn from. And so I spent a lot of time in several different areas of asset management during that time, and it really piqued my curiosity and interest in pursuing a job in that field.
And so you went in while you were, I just want to make sure I understand the chronology. So you went in while you were still at school, you had an unpaid internship, and then you converted that to a full-time job when you graduated?
Yes. Upon graduation, I was offered a job in a very entry-level position, and that began my career at Legg Mason. And what became very clear to me early on was, in order for me to get more responsibility, I had to demonstrate that I could do every job or every task that was given to me extremely well. And that was from the smallest of things, from calculating SEC taxes and confirming trades to higher responsibilities related to valuation work and meeting with companies. And obviously with increasing responsibilities came increasing liability and trust, because the bigger mistakes came with higher and higher levels of consequences and expenses. So it really helped me focus on how important it is to follow directions, listen to what you're being asked to do, and to follow through and always close the loop.
Yes, and I also think that story, thank you for sharing it, is a great example of what I tell everyone, which is that all the way through your education, at whatever level you are, be getting internships, be getting real work experience, paid or unpaid, it doesn't matter. I mean, I like the way you just described the difference between these two things, but it really matters that you are just getting exposure to people, to industries, that you're spending time in a real workplace. So you're absorbing, whether you're doing it or not, you're absorbing like what is work actually about, because it's really not the same as school. And that ultimately, if you do a good job in those internships, again, whether you're paid or unpaid, it gives you a much better chance of actually landing a job either there or somewhere else, because they can see that you succeeded in a different work environment. So thank you for that. So for you, of course, you got to work your way up through one organization for the vast majority of your career, certainly your career to date. However, I know that it wasn't all smooth sailing and that everything just worked, perfectly. I know that in the middle there somewhere, you got married, you had children, you've since gotten divorced. Could you talk to us a little bit about, as you were working your way up, how were you juggling between work and family? And what choices and compromises did you have to make that work?
Sure. So you're right. After 5 years after college, I got married, and for the first 6 years of my marriage, I had a lot of difficulty getting pregnant. But, so it took me about 6 or 7 years, and what it actually, I'm a big believer in there's always a blessing in disguise, and what I realized later in life is that first 10 years that I had spent at my career, I had an opportunity to really spend a lot of time working and traveling and learning the business. And in retrospect, had I not had that time, I probably wouldn't have been able to get to the level that I was. So, it really, those long hours, it gave me an opportunity to focus on trying to do the best job I could and working and traveling and taking advantage of opportunities. And it's really important, I think, especially early on, to challenge yourself and to always be prepared and research and always ask for more work. And that led to an opportunity to do a lot of traveling and to do a lot of networking in the U.S. and outside the U.S. and develop a business that was, at the time, a fairly early stage. And when it did ultimately have my children, I think that one thing that's critical, especially early on when you are starting a family, is to make sure that you've got the support network that you need. And it's even more important as those kids get older and become teenagers, because if you have an established career, to be able to have the flexibility to be there for them is so important, because you don't want to be distracted from your job or from being a parent. It's incredibly important to always keep those priorities in line.
And so, as you were going through, clearly, even though it was the same employer, you had to negotiate for what you wanted. And yet we know women are often negatively perceived for negotiating, particularly negotiating pay. And yet, as I said, to get where you got, personally and professionally, you had to negotiate a lot of things. So what would you say are your best tips for negotiating effectively? And can you give an example of how you put them into practice?
Well, I think it's really important to recognize separating your personal views and aspirations with business. A dear friend of mine used to say to me that it's really important to understand what goes in the too hard pile, and that there's no perfect situations. And even when you're at home arguing with your kids and trying to negotiate, that often is a whole lot harder than going to work and asking people to do something. Because at least you know that they actually might follow through and do it, whereas at home it's always not such an easy negotiation. Mm-hmm. And in financial services, when I started, and I don't think the numbers are too different today, 80 to 85% are men, and I think men and women have very different approaches to negotiating, and focusing on the facts, clear objectives, and being very specific about what your goals are, and keeping track of those objectives relative to what the milestones are for getting ahead. It's very important, and to always try to separate the emotions from the situation and realize that you're there to do a job and it's business. And at the end of the day, your goal is to do the best job that you can for the company, to meet the overall goals of the business and to deliver as much value as you can.
I agree. I think that one of the things that, it's true that almost all decision making is emotional. That's a human fact. But also the truth is that to be a good negotiator, you not only need to put emotion aside, but you also need to be able to think analytically about, what is it I'm really trying to achieve? What is it that the company is trying to achieve? And how do we put these things together in a non-emotional way? So when you view your own performance, for example, I always tell people, you need to stop thinking about how hard it was to do it and all that other stuff, because that makes you very emotive, as opposed to thinking, what was the outcome? which tends to be a much less emotional and a much more quantitative type thing, which is what companies tend to care about. So
right, and to be able to put that into perspective and move on and not dwell on it. Sometimes it's really difficult, but it's a very, very valuable skill set if you can achieve it.
So you get to the executive level. You're running this, kind of $20 billion portfolio. At the top, and actually all the way along, it's fair or not, and I would argue it's not fair, but women are often much more harshly scrutinized than their male peers, not only on performance, but on everything from looks to parenting, etc. Did you find in that, 85% male-dominated world, did you feel that you were more heavily scrutinized? And if so, how did you handle it? Did you have a go-to uniform, or how did you just make that, how did you survive and thrive, I guess I should say?
Well, I think that, unfortunately, we often are our own worst critics and scrutinize ourselves far more than people from the outside. That my go-to uniform was just a black suit. I wore black quite a lot. In fact, my kids used to give me a hard time about it. But to the extent you can do things like that to deflect attention from your appearance and to really focus on your work and hope to be valued for the work that you deliver, I think is really important, because at the end of the day, that's what you want, is to be respected for the quality of the outcome of your work and not so much from the external appearance that you might have.
I agree. The other thing that happens to women as we move up is, contrary to men, women are less liked as they get to the top. And there's a lot of debate about how important that is, and does it matter, and is it more important to be respected or liked? But I'm just curious, was there times where you had to choose between those two things? And if so, how did you handle it? What did you choose?
Well, that's true, and I think it's also important to again step back and say, this is my work life. These people may or may not be my friends, but we are all there to do a job, and it is most important to deliver the end product and to be respected for the outcome. So it's not always emotionally the easiest situation to be in, but it also is important to really to stay focused on the task at hand and to know, but also to not forget the person that you are and never compromise the person that you are, because we are all often challenged with the environment that we might be in at work, and it's very important to just keep things into perspective and to realize that not everyone is the same, and you may not always be liked, or you may not always like the people that you work with, but keeping emotions in check is for me anyway, always leads to a better outcome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's actually one of the reasons I think of you as a consummate professional. You just always seem so balanced and thoughtful, and even your tone of voice, it's very soothing. It's very professional. I can't say I'm exactly the same way. I would say that my sense of emotion in the workplace was much more so. I was all about whooping it up. If it was good news, I was perfectly happy to make a lot of noise and even make a fool of myself, but just really to pump people up and to make them feel great about something we had done well. Now, conversely, I did not scream in the office and raise my voice on the negative side. So I was highly emotive on the positive. And I might have been, disappointed in myself at times, but I agree with you. I think that it needs to feel natural and authentic, and it also you are always having to think about what is your personal brand. So
yeah.
you and I have different personalities, and it makes sense that we would then have different management styles, both of which can work, but are unique to us.
Well, I mean, something you just said. I don't mean to say I'm totally unemotional. Like, I do get very excited about outcomes, and I think it's really, really important. And maybe this is not just for women, but for everybody, especially for young people in their careers. It's so important to celebrate the victories and to be appreciated and to appreciate things in others, because the monetary rewards are great and wonderful, but to really be appreciated for the effort and the work that you put in is so incredibly valuable, both to receive and to give. And I think, if anything, it's even more wonderful to be able to show that appreciation of others.
Mm-hmm. I do agree. I agree. So keeping with the executive level, we often hear that it's lonely at the top even more so for women, frankly, just because there's so few of us. So what is your support system, and how did you create it? Did you have a mentor? Did you have a sponsor? Have you found female friends and been able to maintain those relationships? So talk to us a little bit about how you get support. I mean, particularly, I know, as you said, you've went through divorce, et cetera. Like, how did you manage that?
Well, it is difficult to develop relationships with women, especially in financial services, because to your point, there really aren't a lot, and so it's important to have a support system, family, close friends that you can rely on, especially in times where unexpected issues come up. And so while I don't have a big network, the ones that I have, my parents, my sister, a couple of dear friends that are also in the workforce, they're able to relate to me and understand me, and I try to invest as much as I can in those relationships, as much as the things that the relationships I have at work. And it's really hard to wall off different parts of your life because they're so deeply connected, and motivators in everything at work and at home are all part of who we are, whether it's your friends, your family, your health, your faith. And so that balance is very difficult, especially with unanticipated things that come up, either they're opportunities or they're issues. And so trying to keep that priority of balancing the relationships, both personal and professional, of your time, your energy, and developing your talents is important. And it's not something that you stop doing after college or in the first couple of years. It's a sense of continuous and constant learning that you hopefully will cherish and invest throughout your life. And staying focused on that and reminding yourself of those things, I think, is really, really important, and recognizing that sometimes it takes a long time to realize the benefits of that long-term investment, both personally and professionally. But if you can spend as much time as you can with the people who help to elevate you and assist you and recognize those talents in other people, and it really helps to build you up and to help you meet your personal goals. And more than anything, I think it's important to always be authentic and be who you are and try to do the best job you can at whatever you're tasked with, whether it's something at home or at work, because that ultimately is the best reward.
I completely agree. Would you say the balance of your support network is kind of before childbearing or after, or is it a real split?
I would say it honestly is a real split. There are some people, obviously my parents, my sister, some childhood friends who I've been close with since we were very young. And what's interesting is some of my best friends today that were friends in childhood are the ones that have stayed engaged in their careers and have rose to levels where, there are very few women, because they're the ones that seem to understand the challenges and the issues that come up, and it's very hard to find that confidant to be able to relate to, because especially, unfortunately, among women, it's certainly not as common as it would be for men.
Yeah, I myself, I find that my best friends in the world are actually people that I've known, for one of them since I was literally age of 4, and the other one from 24. So, and they're nothing like me. They don't have children. They have a very, very different life. But I agree, now that I have kids and I have been, getting to know a lot of the parents of my daughter's friends, it's such a different scenario, and it is a real mix. So I like you, I have a blend from the past, from the current, and working and non-working. I think a lot of Kirsten's friends, moms, I think they're kind of way of categorizing me is just like, okay, that's Perry, that's Kirsten's mom. She does something, I'm not sure what it is, but she's very busy. and so they don't, we're not talking about kind of world affairs most of the time, but I love them because we're talking about our kids, right? And there's nothing, so it's about kind of having friends for different subjects, if you will.
Right. Yeah. I'll never forget one of my favorite memories, and it's one of the things, and you'll understand you have to laugh at, was one of my daughters at her birthday party. I was taking pictures, and there were a bunch of other mothers there, and my nanny was there, and one of the mothers said to my nanny, "I can't believe they hired a photographer for a 4-year-old's birthday party." And she said, "That's not a photographer, that's her mother." And I thought it was, I just had to laugh because, unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to really know a lot of my children's friends while I was working. And so there was a network of people that I just wasn't part of. And, but fortunately, I think I had a network of people that I was part of. And to your point, I could relate to, and we could certainly have discussions about things that were relevant to whatever we were doing at the time.
Exactly. So I know it's hard, and a lot of people don't like to talk about these things, but I think it's really important in order to help other women to really also explore the things that didn't go so well. So since you made it to the top, it didn't derail your rise. Would you be willing to share either a disappointment or a failure or a point where you just felt like throwing in the towel, and tell us a little bit about what was that, and then how did you get through it?
Well, I'm sure most people are familiar with the financial crisis in 2008, and I obviously had a front row seat during that after a very long time being in asset management and being in a very fortunate position to have returns that were quite respectable in the market. And so all of a sudden I was thrust into an environment where it wasn't so easy, and many of the meetings I had were very difficult. And what kept me grounded was really thinking about the people that were important to my life. I actually would draw 3 little smiley faces on my presentation before I would go in to a board meeting, knowing that I was likely going to be fired. And those smiley faces represented my kids. And so mentally I thought, if they're okay, I'm okay. And I would go into that meeting and I would get yelled at, and they would complain about our performance, and ultimately, certainly in that environment, more often than not, we lost assets, and I walked out of the meeting empty-handed, and having to endure that over and over again in a fairly short time period, and also in the midst of that going through a pretty difficult divorce, made me question a lot of things in my life. But I think, really focusing on what was important and trying to prioritize those important things can help you get through that emotionally. And that's when those long-term investments in those relationships really pay off, because you're not alone, and a lot of people are going through things that are very similar. And just being able to talk about it outside of a work environment in a comfortable, confident space that you believe is safe is really incredibly valuable.
And I can imagine, there's just, you, as somebody who is a real performer and who is focused on, pleasing the client and over delivery, et cetera, going into meeting after meeting, knowing that in many respects, for no fault of your own, you're going to get pummeled. That is a tough scenario. And you have to have a lot of backbone, and you have to be able to pick yourself back up to be able to do that. There is another story that I've heard you share once or twice before that I just thought was so interesting, and I was wondering if you might share it as well. And that is, I believe it was Saudi Arabia. You had to go give a presentation. It was definitely in an Arab country.
Right.
And it just, I remember that when I was thinking about scrutiny and how tough it is sometimes to be a woman and what you have to go through in order to deliver. Would you be willing to share that story?
Sure. So as part of my responsibility, I was fortunate to have to do a lot of traveling, and I would go to the Middle East at least once a year. And I traveled to places like Kuwait and Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates during the time that I worked, but I had never been to Saudi Arabia, and part of that was because we didn't manage assets there, but also the investment guidelines there weren't very closely aligned with the type of way that we managed money. And I had a friend who was managing money there for a wealthy family, and he said, well, if you're in Kuwait, it's only a 2-hour flight. You should come to Saudi. And so I needed a visa, and I sent over my information, and he sheepishly called back and said, I'm really sorry, but unless you bring your husband or your father, you're actually not permitted to visit our offices. And And I said, well, that's fine, because I really didn't see whether it would make sense anyway. And 2 days later, he called back and he said, my head of HR was looking at your visa application and said, actually, if you'd like Ms. Gay to come, she's permitted, because given that she's well over 40, she's considered grandmother material in the nicest sort of way. And so she doesn't actually need to bring a male family member as long as she's traveling with her male colleagues. And so I did go to Saudi. I wore an abaya, and I wore, so black from head to toe with only my face showing from the time I stepped off the plane until I stepped back on the plane. In fact, my son, who was very young at the time, said, Mama, you look like a ninja. But they did say to me, that you will have to walk behind your male colleagues. You can't walk anywhere alone, and they'll have to ask permission for you to speak, and don't expect anyone to look directly at you when you're there, but that's just the way it is. And so I did visit. I was actually able to give a speech, and people did look at me, surprisingly. It was all male. Even the receptionists in the office were all male. But when we had our prep meeting the morning at the hotel, we scheduled a meeting at the breakfast, and when we met at the restaurant entrance, they said, well, I'm sorry, if you're having breakfast with your female colleague, you're not permitted to sit in the main part of the restaurant. And so they put us in a small room off to the side so that we could prepare for our meeting. So it went really well, to the extent it could. But it I think, reminded me of how different, and this was only a few years ago, how different the world is and the treatment of women, especially, at higher levels in your career.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we've all been through, not that, but something similar, where it's just like almost surreal what you have to go through, because I think women coming up today, thankfully, are feeling much more equal and much more capable and much less discriminated against. And yet they need to be prepared that there will still be times or locations where you are very likely to face something that you just think is totally outrageous. And you need to figure out how you're going to handle it. You could have just said, no, I'm not going to come. I'm not going to walk behind my male colleague, whatever. I worked a lot in the Middle East as well. And my choice was similar. I was like, if this is your custom that you cover up, et cetera, as long as you're not disrespecting me in that way, then I'm like, fine. That's, I'm willing to adapt, because I would assume that you would have to adapt if you came here, at least to a degree. So,
right. Well, you just reminded me of something I think it's critically important, especially if it's for someone who's considering working abroad, which is to the extent you can, study the culture before you get there and understand what the traditions are and what the expectations are, because I'm left-handed, and one of the things that I was schooled in before I went over there, which I was so grateful for the prep, was I was not permitted to write with my left hand. It would be considered disrespectful. I was not allowed to eat with my left hand. So I literally had to sit on my left hand to remind myself the entire time. And the same is true when I traveled in Asia. I was briefed ahead of time about the translation rates, and especially if you're in China, where there is typically a government translator there. There's always somebody present, even if the speech you're giving is in English to an audience who understands it. They have to, by law, translate it to the government person that is in the audience. And so you have to modify your presentation dramatically because of that translation rate, which is really important to know in advance of a trip. If you have a 30-minute presentation and you only have ultimately 10 minutes to deliver it.
Yep, I agree. And I'm also left-handed. And so, as you can imagine, living in Asia and the Middle East for 3.5 years was quite a challenge.
Yeah.
Exactly right. So, looking back now, we're getting close to the end of the interview. Looking back, are you happy with how everything turned out? Is there anything you would change? What advice would you give to your earlier self?
Well, again, to my earlier phrase, I think everything happens for a reason, and there's always things that are blessings in disguise, and sometimes it takes a long time to really realize those. So I am so happy with where I am in life currently. it was not certainly a path I imagined I would take, but I don't know whether anyone, follows through on exactly the plan that they may have dreamed of at a younger age. So I am grateful for the opportunities that I had and the path that's led me here, and I always think that it's important to learn from every experience, whether at the time it seems good or bad. There's always a silver lining that can lead to you becoming a better person.
I was thinking, I said earlier that I thought you were, a consummate professional and committed and caring. I want to add the word resilient, because I was thinking that not only was 2008 a year that you had the financial crisis, but there were also other things in your, like you just got hit with one or two awful years, I remember. And I just thought, when I first heard about kind of the number of things that piled on for you, I thought, wow, who gets off the mat after that? And you did. And you thrived. And so, I think resiliency cannot be overestimated for anybody. I think it's going to matter, because you don't know where life is going to go. But at some point, no matter who you are, life is going to knock you down. And,
right.
and as you say, it's about, one of the people I interviewed, I thought it was so cute. Her daughter told her this when she got fired after being, kind of a global CMO. She got fired and she came home, and her daughter was about 9, I think, at the time. And she said, so Mom, she said, when life gives you lemons, and her mom said, yeah, I know, we make lemonade. She goes, no, Mom, you don't make lemonade. That would be so predictable. She said, no, you make orange juice, because that's the unexpected thing. And I just thought, that's perfect. So there you go. So you rebound and you make orange juice.
And realize that everybody has challenges. I mean, the more that you get to know people, the more you realize that you aren't alone. And it's honestly, it's the way that you deal with those challenges that you face. And not to say that I didn't have days where I didn't want to get out of bed, because I did and probably still will in the future. But it's on balance, it's really important to recognize that there is no perfect situation, and it's important to sometimes put things in the too hard pile and to realize that there is light at the end of the tunnel. You just have to keep moving forward.
One last question before I get to the last word, if you will. I don't think we covered mentors or sponsors. Did you have any on your way up? Did you have somebody who really took you under their wing and helped you through Legg Mason, or was it just a series of decent bosses, or how did that actually work?
There was one incredible boss that I had actually throughout my career, but there certainly were no women mentors. Unfortunately, there were women that I knew and respected, and I would try to talk to occasionally when it was possible. And I did try to join some women's organizations and found those networks incredibly valuable, especially if it was networks of professional women in a similar field. And I think that's so important, because it helps us recognize that we're not alone, and there are similar challenges that a lot of people face. So certainly there was one or two individuals who helped me professionally in understanding my work and doing a better job there. But from a personal standpoint, I think those outside professional networks are really critically important to have and to be able to fall back on and just bounce ideas on in a safe environment.
So your last word on this: you did build the life and career of your dreams, not without difficulties, disappointments, etc., but you did actually, you have created something that is really worth admiration and has a lot to share for others. What would you tell other women who are seeking to do the same, who want to build the life and career of their dreams?
Well, I think authenticity is so critically important, and don't try to be someone else, because at the end of the day, all you have is yourself and your efforts, and also the relationships that you have. To be able to invest in them and maintain them is so important. And I was fortunate a couple of months ago to give a commencement speech at a graduation, and I finished with a quote from one of my favorite people, Maya Angelou, who said, a woman who's convinced that she deserves to accept only the best challenges herself to always give her best. And that we should pursue things that we love doing, and always remember at the end of the day that people don't remember what we say or what we did. They remember how you made them feel. And I think those words have stayed with me because emotionally I think women can relate to that more than anything. So it's critically important to always be authentic both at work and at home, and to be present, and to, as much as we are always trying to plan and think ahead and prioritize, but don't forget what's going on right now. And especially if you have children or if you're caring for parents, or those moments you can't get back. So it's and the same is true in a career at the early stages later on, and to really always, to the extent you can, to be present every single day.
Such great advice to end on. Mary Chris, thank you so much for your time, and I hope to get to see you soon.
Thank you. Take care.
You've been listening to Pivot Points, a series designed to help ambitious women have the careers and lives of their dreams. To hear more interviews, go to www.yourcareeryourterms.com. And be sure to tell us what you think. If there are topics you'd like covered or people you'd like interviewed, please